Daniel worked at a small antique store, spending most days surrounded by forgotten treasures and silent histories. Business was slow that afternoon when she walked in. Tall, elegant, with a presence that demanded attention. Her deep brown eyes scanned the shelves until they landed on a particular glass jar tucked in the corner. She approached the counter, her movements deliberate. "I need this jar," she said, her voice smooth yet commanding. Daniel glanced at it. Nothing remarkable, a simple, aged container with an intricate brass lid. "You have a good eye." "It's been here for a while," he said, handing it to her. She ran her fingers along the glass, almost caressing it. It belonged to someone important. Her lips curved into a slight smile. "I need you to bring it to my house. Tonight. Alone." The request was odd. Customers bought items all the time. No one ever asked for a personal delivery. "Is there a reason?" he asked. She leaned in slightly, her perfume a mix of jasmine and something unfamiliar. "Just bring it." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "And when you do, don't ask questions." Something about the way she said it sent a chill through him. He wanted to decline, to brush off the strange request. But something in her gaze held him there, like an unsolved mystery waiting to be unraveled. She slid a card across the counter. Her address. "See you tonight." Then, without another word, she walked out, leaving only the scent of intrigue behind. Daniel stared at the jar, turning it in his hands. The glass was cool, the brass lid slightly tarnished. There was nothing inside, just empty space. And yet, it felt heavier than it should. As evening approached, he debated whether to go. Curiosity gnawed at him, tangled with hesitation. He wasn't the type to follow strangers into the unknown. And yet, here he was, standing outside her house, jar in hand. The house was larger than he expected, tucked away at the end of a quiet street. Lights glowed through the windows, casting a golden hue against the night. He knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. She stood there, dressed differently now, in something softer, more inviting. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. He hesitated but walked in. The air was thick with a scent he couldn't place, something warm and intoxicating. She led him to a dimly lit room, lined with bookshelves and a flickering fireplace. "Did you bring it?" she asked. Daniel lifted the jar. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The touch was brief, but something about it lingered. She placed the jar on a small table, then turned to him. "Do you believe in fate?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know," he admitted. She smiled, as if she already knew his answer. "Maybe tonight will change that." Daniel sat stiffly on the velvet couch as she poured 2 glasses of wine. The flames from the fireplace cast shifting shadows along the walls, making everything feel surreal. She handed him a glass, her fingers barely touching his. "To new beginnings," she murmured, taking a slow sip. He hesitated before drinking. "You said this jar belonged to someone important. Who was it?" She ran a fingertip along the rim of the glass, eyes locked on the jar. "My late husband," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller. "He left things behind, secrets, regrets." Daniel felt an unease settle over him. "And the jar?" She picked it up carefully, her expression unreadable. It was his favorite. He said it held something more valuable than gold. She turned to him, her gaze softening. "Would you like to see?" He nodded, curiosity winning over caution. She twisted the brass lid open, pulling out a single folded note and a small, antique key. She unfolded the paper, reading it aloud. "Only with trust can love be tested." The words meant nothing to Daniel, but she held the note like it was sacred. Then, she set it aside and placed the key in his palm. "Do you believe in second chances?" she asked. Daniel studied the old-fashioned key, its edges worn smooth from time. "I suppose that depends." She stepped closer, the space between them closing too quickly. "My husband never understood love. He believed in control. Power." Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "I don't want to live in his shadow anymore." The air between them shifted. He could feel her warmth, smell the subtle traces of jasmine, and something richer beneath it. She reached for his hand, pressing the key into his fingers.
Keep it.
Maybe one day, you'll find what it unlocks. Daniel's breath was unsteady. Why are you telling me this? She smiled, but there was something unreadable behind it. Because you're different. A clock chimed in the distance, breaking the moment. She stepped back, her demeanor shifting again. Come back tomorrow, she said softly. There's more I want to show you. Everything in him said to walk away. This woman, this house, this night, it all felt too perfect, too staged. And yet he nodded. As he reached the door, she touched his arm. One more thing. He turned, meeting her gaze. Don't open the jar again. Not yet. She shut the door gently behind him, leaving him standing outside with nothing but a key, a cryptic note, and a feeling he couldn't shake. Daniel returned the next evening, drawn by a pull he couldn't explain. The door was already slightly open, as if she had been waiting for him. He stepped inside, and there she was, draped in a silk dress that shimmered in the candlelight. Everything about her was intoxicating, the way she moved, the way she looked at him like he was the only thing that mattered. I knew you'd come back, she said softly. Daniel swallowed, unsure whether that was a good thing. You said you had more to show me. She smiled, leading him to a room he hadn't seen before. A grand oak desk stood in the center, papers scattered across its surface. An old photograph sat among them. Daniel's breath caught. It was the same man from the picture in the antique store, the one she claimed was dead. She followed his gaze. My husband, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Daniel's mind raced. You said he. He's gone, she interrupted, stepping closer. But not in the way you think. Something about the way she said it made the air feel heavy. She reached for his hand, her touch lingering. Do you trust me? Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, but the way she looked at him, the way she made him feel, he couldn't. He nodded. Her lips parted slightly, and before he could think, she pulled him into a kiss. It was slow, deliberate, sending a rush through him he hadn't felt in years. He let himself fall into it, into her, into whatever this was. Then, the sound of a door creaking. She pulled away abruptly, eyes wide. Fear flashed across her face. You need to go. Now. Daniel turned, heart pounding. A tall figure stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. His stomach dropped. The man from the photograph. Alive. Evelyn's breath was unsteady. Please let me explain. The man stepped forward, his gaze shifting between them before landing on the jar still sitting on the table. His expression darkened. Daniel felt his entire body tense. What is this? The man exhaled, shaking his head. Not again. A sick realization crawled up Daniel's spine. He wasn't the first. He wasn't special. Evelyn reached for him, desperation in her eyes. It's not what you think. But Daniel already knew. He had been played. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. The man, her so-called late husband, stood there calm but knowing. Evelyn's fingers tightened around his wrist, as if she could keep him from running, from understanding the truth. But it was too late. The man exhaled, shaking his head. She did it again. His voice was low, almost amused. Daniel's stomach twisted. What is this? Evelyn's grip faltered. Please let me explain. The man ignored her, stepping toward the jar. He ran a hand over its surface like an old habit. She collects people, he said, almost to himself. Men like you. Men who think they're different. He looked up, locking eyes with Daniel. But you're not, are you? Daniel felt his body go cold. He had walked into a game he didn't even know he was playing. He turned to Evelyn. Was any of it real? Her face flickered with something, regret. Maybe, but she didn't answer. The man smirked, tapping the jar. She tests them, makes them feel chosen. Special. Then she watches them break. Daniel clenched his fists. And you let her? The man let out a slow breath. I used to be just like you. His gaze darkened. Until I wasn't. Evelyn's voice wavered. You don't understand. Daniel stepped back. No. I do. The weight of it all crushed him. The whispered words, the lingering touches, the illusion of something meaningful. it was never about love. It was about control. Manipulation. Evelyn reached for him again, her voice desperate. You are different. Daniel shook his head.
No.
I was just next. He turned and walked out, the cool night air hitting his face like a slap. The jar was still in his hand. He didn't know why he took it. Maybe as proof. Maybe as a reminder. As he stepped into the darkness, he heard her voice one last time. Daniel. He didn't look back.